the entire history of human civilization. Imagine standing on an empty plain. No roads, no cities, no language, no fire, just wind, grass, and the distant sound of something you don't understand yet. Thunder, or a predator, or your own heartbeat. You are human, but civilization? That hasn't been invented yet. Everything you are about to see, every empire, every invention, every war, every idea that changed the world, it all began from nothing, from one species wandering in the dark, trying to survive one more day. This is the entire history of human civilization, from the first fire to the first computer, from mud huts to skyscrapers, from stone spears to nuclear weapons, in one journey, from the very beginning. Let's go. The dawn of humanity, Africa, 300,000 to 70,000 years ago. Ambient wind, savanna sounds, gentle orchestral underscore. The story begins in Africa, not with kings, not with warriors, but with a small group of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, who emerged somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. They were not alone. The world was full of other human species, the Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus in scattered pockets across the globe. These were not primitive monsters. They made tools. They buried their dead. Some even made art. But something was different about Homo sapiens. We had something none of the others fully developed. The ability to think in symbols, to tell stories, to imagine things that didn't exist yet, to cooperate with strangers we'd never met, bound together by shared myths, shared gods, and shared ideas. Anthropologists call it the cognitive revolution, roughly 70,000 years ago, when our brains rewired in a way that made us capable of the abstract. We could plan seasons ahead, we could lie, we could dream, we could worship. And it was this invisible upgrade that made us dangerous. The Great Migration, 70,000 to 12,000 years ago. Music shifts, adventurous, with subtle tension. Starting around 70,000 years ago, small bands of humans began leaving Africa. This wasn't a march. It wasn't an exodus. It was a slow, generational drift. Children born a little further north than their parents, hunting game that moved with the seasons, following rivers toward unknown coastlines. Over thousands of years, humans reached the Middle East, then South Asia, then Southeast Asia. Then, in one of the most astonishing journeys in history, they built watercraft and crossed open ocean to reach Australia over 50,000 years ago. Think about that. These people had no maps, no compasses, no satellites, and yet they crossed 60 miles of open ocean to an unseen continent. By 15,000 years ago, humans had crossed from Siberia into North America, following herds of mammoths across a land bridge where the Bering Sea now stands, and within a few thousand years had reached the southern tip of South America. We were everywhere, and everywhere we went, we transformed the landscape. Forests burned, megafauna vanished, the mammoths, the giant sloths, the cave bears. Whether by climate or by hunting, the world remade itself around us. We were the first great force of change on this planet. We just didn't know it yet. The agricultural revolution. The Fertile Crescent, 10,000 BC music softens. Pastoral, hopeful, slightly melancholic. For 250,000 years, humans hunted and gathered. We were nomads. We followed the herds, ate the seasons, and lived in small tribes, rarely exceeding 150 people. Then around 10,000 BCE, everything changed. In the river valleys of what is today Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, a region ancient historians would later call the Fertile Crescent, something extraordinary happened. Someone noticed that seeds fell from wild grasses and grew again in the same place the next year. Someone else noticed that baby goats, if kept alive, grew into animals that produced milk and meat for years. These weren't revelations. They were slow, gradual observations made over generations. But their consequences were catastrophic, in the most profound possible meaning of that word. Agriculture meant permanence. For the first time, humans didn't need to follow the food. The food could come to them. Villages emerged, then towns, then cities. And with cities came something new: hierarchy. When food could be stored, it could be hoarded. When it could be hoarded, it could be controlled. And whoever controlled the food controlled the people. The first rulers were probably not warriors. They were likely priests, men and women who claimed to speak to the gods who sent the rain and turned the soil. Give us your grain. We will pray for your harvest. The oldest bargain in civilization. The first civilizations, Mesopotamia and Egypt. 3,500 to 2000 BC music rises, majestic, ancient sounding, with distant horn around 3,500 BCE. Two civilizations emerged, simultaneously, independently, and almost competitively. That would set the template for every civilization that followed. Mesopotamia. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in the city of Uruk, humans built the world's first true urban center. Tens of thousands of people living in one place, managing trade, organizing labor, tracking resources. And to keep track of it all, they invented something that would reshape human consciousness forever. Writing. The first written records weren't poetry or philosophy. They were tax receipts, grain tallies, who owed what to whom. The accountants were first. The poets came later. But writing did something miraculous. It allowed ideas to travel beyond the reach of a human voice. It allowed laws to outlive their makers. It allowed one generation to speak directly to the next. Within a few centuries, Mesopotamia gave the world its first codified law, the Code of Hammurabi. Its first epic poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story about a king's grief over losing his friend and his search for immortality. A story written 4,000 years ago about what it means to be human, and we still read it today. Across the desert, along the Nile, Egypt was building something even more audacious. The Egyptians didn't just want to organize life. They wanted to conquer death. Under the pharaohs, god-kings who stood between the mortal world and the divine, Egypt became the most stable civilization the ancient world had ever seen. While Mesopotamia rose and fell in endless cycles of city-states warring, Egypt maintained a continuous cultural identity for 3,000 years. 3,000 years. The distance in time between Cleopatra and the building of the Great Pyramid is greater than the distance between Cleopatra and us. Let that sink in. The Age of Bronze and Iron. The ancient world, 2000 to 500 BC music becomes more martial. Drums, percussion, sweeping strings. By 2000 BCE, civilization had spread across the ancient world in remarkable ways. In the Indus Valley, in what is today Pakistan, a sophisticated urban civilization had already risen and mysteriously vanished, leaving behind planned cities with indoor plumbing that wouldn't be equaled in Europe for another 4,000 years. In China, the Shang dynasty was developing its own writing system, casting magnificent bronze ritual vessels and building a civilization that would prove to be the most durable in human history. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec were already sculpting colossal stone heads in the jungle, faces staring out from the earth, representing a culture we still don't fully understand. Humanity was not one story, it was many stories, running in parallel, separated by oceans and mountains and desert, each one believing, for a long time, that they were the center of the world. They were all right. Back in the Middle East, civilization entered a turbulent era. The Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BCE, remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Within 50 years, nearly every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed simultaneously. The Hittite Empire vanished. The Mycenaean Greeks disappeared. Egypt barely survived. Trade networks collapsed. Cities were burned and never rebuilt. What caused it? Climate change? Drought? Migration of the mysterious sea peoples? Internal rebellions? Scholars still debate it today, but from the ashes came something new. Iron, cheaper than bronze, harder when refined, accessible to armies, not just kings, the democratization of war. And with iron came a new era, the Iron Age, and with it, a new cast of civilizations that would reshape the ancient world.
The Classical Age. Greece, Persia, Rome, India, China. 500 BC to 500 AD. 500 years before the birth of Christ, the ancient world experienced an explosion of ideas so profound that historians call it the Axial Age. In Greece, philosophers were asking questions no one had dared to formalize before. What is justice? What is the good life? How do we know what is true? Socrates wandered the streets of Athens, annoying powerful men with questions. Plato wrote it all down. Aristotle systematized the whole world into categories. In India, the Buddha sat beneath a fig tree and taught that suffering came from desire, and that liberation was possible for every living being. In China, Confucius walked from court to court, teaching that the foundation of civilization was not law or force, but virtue, ritual, and the proper relationships between human beings. In Persia, Zoroaster proclaimed that the universe was a cosmic battle between light and darkness. The Age of Faith. The Rise of World Religions. 0 to 1000 AD. Into the vacuum left by collapsing empires, faith rushed in. Christianity began as a small Jewish sect in Roman-occupied Judea. Its founder, Jesus of Nazareth, was executed as a political criminal. His followers, expecting the end of the world, instead found themselves building a movement that would survive the end of Rome itself. By 313 CE, the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. By the end of the 4th century, it was the official state religion. Within 500 years of the crucifixion, Christianity had spread from Ireland to Ethiopia to Armenia to India. Then, in the 7th century, in the deserts of Arabia, a merchant named Muhammad began receiving
the medieval world. Europe, the Mongols, and global crossroads, 1000 to 1400 AD. In Europe, the centuries after Rome's fall are often called the Dark Ages, unfairly. They were not dark. They were different. The Catholic Church held civilization together. Monasteries preserved books. Cathedrals were built with engineering sophistication that still astonishes. Universities, the world's first, were founded at Bologna, Paris, and Oxford in the 12th century. The Crusades, the violent, complicated, and often catastrophic military campaigns launched by Christian Europe to reclaim Jerusalem, created centuries of contact, conflict, and exchange between European, Islamic, and Byzantine civilizations. Ideas, technologies, diseases, and goods crossed the Mediterranean in both directions. Meanwhile, on the steppes of Central Asia, a single man was about to create the largest contiguous land empire in the Age of Exploration, 1400 to 1600 AD. The Age of Exploration, 1400 to 1600 AD. In the mid-15th century, Europe was still a peripheral player on the world stage. The great civilizations of China, India, and the Islamic world vastly exceeded Europe in wealth, population, and sophistication. Then, Europe got lucky. Or rather, Europe got desperate and ambitious. Blocked from the lucrative overland trade routes to Asia by the Ottoman Empire, European merchants began looking for alternatives, and they found them on the ocean. Portugal led the way, sending ships south along the coast of Africa, building forts and trading posts, eventually rounding the Cape of Good Hope and opening a sea route to India. Then, in 1492, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus, funded by the Spanish crown, sailed west and found something no European map had prepared for: the Americas. 2 entire continents, home to hundreds of millions of people.
The Scientific Revolution and Enlightenment, 1500 to 1800 AD. Something strange was happening in Europe. people were starting to question everything. In 1543, Nicolaus Copernicus published a paper arguing that the Earth moved around the sun, not the other way around. He sat on the manuscript for years, terrified of the Church's response. He was right to be cautious. Galileo Galilei, a century later, pointed a telescope at the sky, confirmed the theory, and was put under house arrest for the rest of his life for defying Church doctrine. But the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Isaac Newton described the laws that govern the motion of every object in the universe, from a falling apple to the orbit of planets, with a single set of mathematical equations. The universe was not mysterious and unknowable. It was lawful, and its laws could be discovered by human reason. This was a revolution not just in science, it was a revolution in how humans thought about themselves. If the universe operated by rational laws, perhaps human society did too. Perhaps kings didn't rule by divine right. Perhaps government existed to serve the people, not the other way around. The Enlightenment, the intellectual movement that swept Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, gave voice to these ideas. John Locke wrote that all people had natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Voltaire mocked religion and advocated for freedom of speech. Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that civilization had corrupted natural human equality. These were not abstract ideas. They were revolutionary ones. The Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1900 AD. In the mills and mines of England, another revolution was beginning. One with no armies, no manifestos, and no single great leader. Just steam. In 1769, James Watt improved the steam engine, making it efficient enough to power machinery at scale. Within decades, steam engines were pumping water from mines, driving textile mills, and powering locomotives that could move goods and people faster than any horsepower. For the first time in human history, the limits of muscle, human or animal, had been broken. Factories appeared, cities swelled. Millions of people left the countryside for the promises and miseries of industrial labor. Children worked 16-hour days in coal mines. Rivers ran black with chemical waste. The air above industrial cities was so thick with smog that people never saw the stars. But goods were being produced at a scale and speed never before imagined. Wealth was accumulating at a rate that made even the richest ancient kings look modest. And the Industrial Revolution exported itself. First to Western Europe, then to North America, then to Japan, transforming the global balance of power. European nations, armed with industrial weapons and steam. The Century of Catastrophe, 1900 to 1945 AD. The 20th century began with extraordinary optimism. Science was conquering disease. Technology was shrinking the world. The great powers of Europe had been at peace for decades. Surely, some said, the age of great wars was over. Civilization had grown too sophisticated, too interconnected for nations to destroy each other. They were devastatingly wrong. In the summer of 1914, the assassination of one man, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, triggered a chain of alliances and mobilizations that plunged Europe into the most destructive war it had ever seen. World War I killed 17 million people. It destroyed 4 empires.
The modern world, 1945 to present day. From the ruins of the Second World War, a new order emerged. The United Nations was founded, a global institution designed to prevent the catastrophe from ever repeating. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed in 1948, proclaiming for the first time in any binding international document that all human beings possessed inherent dignity and rights that no government could legitimately take away. But the peace was uneasy. The United States and the Soviet Union.
The digital age and the world we live in. 1990 to now. The internet, developed from military communication networks, became publicly available in the early 1990s. Within 30 years, it had connected half of all humanity. The smartphone, a device more powerful than the computers that sent humans to the moon, was in the pocket of 4 billion people. Artificial intelligence, the attempt to build machines that can think, crossed from science fiction into everyday reality. The world shrank. Ideas moved at the speed of light. Revolutions were organized on social media. Misinformation spread just as fast. New crises emerged. Climate change, driven by the same fossil fuels that had powered the Industrial Revolution, began altering weather patterns, raising sea levels, and threatening the stability of civilization itself. Pandemics proved that our interconnected world could spread a pathogen to every corner of the globe. 300,000 years. From a campfire on the African savanna to a civilization spanning the globe. From scratching symbols into clay to building machines that can think. From small tribes of 100 people to a species of 8 billion. Navigating a shared planet with no instruction manual. We have been conquerors and refugees, tyrants and liberators,